Jennifer. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Not too bad, actually. I'm having a really good day. Let me ask you a question. How do we know each other?
Well, I saw you in my phone. And you were having such a good time. It was kind of infectious, and I started watching what you were doing, and then I started talking to you because here we are in COVID, and how else do you strike up a conversation with somebody? And it just started going back and forth. Somebody said to me, "Well, what do you miss?" And I was like, I kind of miss meeting somebody new, shaking their hand, giving them a hug. I'm just in my little bubble, and I have the people around me, which is great, and my work and whatever, but that whole feeling of being able to expand one's horizons by talking to somebody new, that I miss, and the fear around that is rough.
Can you tell us a little bit about your professional background?
Well, I have reinvented myself a little bit in the past. I lived in Europe for about 25 years from the moment I handed in my thesis at college. I didn't even stay for graduation. I got on a plane and I went to Paris, and I didn't really quite know what I was going to do, but I ended up not staying there for the summer. I kind of stayed in Europe for 25 years. So I started translating scripts, and then I fell into deeper and deeper into writing and then producing. And so I was involved in film for a long time, and then I had children, and I was sort of a mom for a while, and I still tried to write in my free time. And then in 2008, we moved to LA, and I got here and I kind of freaked out about the food.
In what way?
Well, going into the supermarket, and that's the first place you go. And just being overwhelmed and thinking I didn't know what to buy, and most of it looked like junk, and I didn't like the brands. And so in England, I was a drop-off spot for a farm box. And so I was like, well, what are the farm boxes? Oh, they're called CSAs. I figured that out. And then I was like, oh my God, these farmers markets are insane. I started going there, and I started meeting the growers. And I'd actually had an idea when I was a mom, living in England with 3 small children. And I was this drop-off spot for the farm box. And I was like, well, what if I created a box that had not just the veggies? Because you still have to figure out everything else. Mm-hmm. And I was like, if everybody had basically the same meat and grain and orange juice and eggs and cheese and whatever all those elements are, and we had recipes to go with it, we could multiply that. And so I kind of pulled that idea out of the drawer, and it's like, I'm going to go for it. And started building these boxes and just selling them to just a handful of people that I knew.
What's the name of the box, your company?
It's called Narrative Food. At the time, it was called Out of the Box Collective. And then a couple years ago, I rebranded to Narrative Food because I kind of realized one of the things I'm most interested in is the stories of the food and the people behind the food, as opposed to companies and machines and the industrial food versus just the...
Can you give us an example of one of the vendors you work with?
Oh my God, there's so many of them.
What about the heritage grain people?
Okay, so there's a really cool thing going on in LA, and not just in California, but there are other regional versions of this in other areas as well. But here we have a thing called the Tehachapi Grain Project, for example, which links up a few people who are growing grains that are really well suited to California. And in fact, one of those people is Nate, who used to sell, he had a brand called Fat Uncle Almonds, and I used to sell his almonds, and then he started growing the wheat, and he had the combine harvester, and then there's this Sherry who has Tehachapi grains, and she gets the flour and she distributes it to different chefs, or the tortilla maker, or the bread maker, or the pastries, or whatever, and then it just grows into all these really cool projects with different small scale makers.
Explain a little bit what is heritage wheat or heritage grain? How does it differ from normally grown grain?
Well, there's a few things. I mean, one of them is that there's, industrial wheat for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
They have seeds that, you know, they grow easily, whatever. A lot of, you know, the whole GMO movement, it has to do with the grains, like corn, for example.
Right.
And so
Has
the
that
whole,
also fallen into the grain field as well, or part of the whole industrial?
well, that's
farming
really
complex?
yeah, I mean, the grains, corn is one of the big things. So corn is subsidized in America, and most of those big, massive corn growers, they have genetically modified seeds that need to have these pesticides. It works hand in hand with pesticides, and so, you know, these big brands like Pillsbury. I mean, you had a TikTok about a Pop-Tart from a brand that is one of those kinds of brands that works with those kinds of grains, and it's all subsidized by the government. It creates a lot of really toxic pollution that flows into the Mississippi River and goes into the Gulf of Mexico, and just, it's disgusting. One of the big problems with using that kind of mass agriculture is that it kills the soil.
Right.
And one of the most important things that we can do to sequester carbon out of the atmosphere, you know, to get it out of the atmosphere, is to absorb it, and you need healthy soil to do that.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I'm all about regenerative agriculture, and you don't get that with, you know, that kind of mass grain kind of thing. So these grains that they're growing are old-fashioned seeds. They're old-fashioned. They're old. They developed well to grow in this climate.
Okay.
And so they're rediscovering these grains, and they're growing them and milling them, and they make polenta, so they're doing corn, and they're using different kinds of wheat. Some of it's good for bread, some of it's good for, you know, different usages. And so that's really exciting to see and be a part of developing that. So
Amazing.
yeah.
What other? Well, in your box,
Yeah.
what else do you put? Well, give me an example. What's inside your box?
Well, there's some different boxes that we do, but our sort of our most famous box in a way is just our large narrative provisions box. And so not only does it have food from, you know, it has produce, it has 3 pasture raised cuts of meat, which all come from this amazing butcher in Orange County that only works with regenerative ranchers, meaning that those animals that are grazing are regenerating the soil as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so not only does that meat not have the negative impact that a lot of meat can have, it actually has a positive impact. So there's the produce, there's meats, there's
Cheeses?
yeah, there's always a cheese, there's eggs, there's orange juice, there's a grain or a pulse like beans or a grain, and it could be pasta. Like we have a local pasta maker who's in Pasadena called Semolina Pasta, who's amazing, and a regional specialty, which is a sort of gives us an opportunity to do something like maybe it's the pickles or honey or whatever, and then we create a meal plan with recipes that goes with the box, and every week it's kind of tells a different story. So this coming week it's called Glorious Opportunities, and it's kind of Martin Luther King and the inauguration, and it has some amazing basically Black culinary creatives recipes from them. So we celebrate different voices and different cultures. One box that I did just after the person who shall not be named became president and the Muslim ban started, we did a box based on a blog called Add a Little Lemon, which is an LA-based blogger who's Iraqi. And so all the recipes were based on Iraqi dishes. And I got a letter back from a mom a few weeks later, and she was like, oh my God, this is so amazing because my child, I can't remember if they were 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever, but they love maps. And we found Iraq on the map, And I can't tell you how happy I was that the very first encounter that they had with Iraq was about the foods and the funny comments and the recipes, and it was nothing about war or xenophobia or terrorism or all of those horrible things. And I swear to God, that one thing just really made the whole year worthwhile. Because I can tell you, sometimes it's been hard. We have challenges every week. It's not easy what we do. One thing that was really interesting, I started this just kind of coming out of the recession of 2008. In a way, the last screenplay I wrote was about the founders of the Greenpeace Foundation, the whole Save the Whales thing. And I'd spent 6 months in there, and I got to the end of it, and I was sort of like, we moved to LA around that time, partly because of that movie. But I got here, and I don't know, I just wasn't feeling it, and there were problems with the rights of the film and all that. But the food space was full of such creative people that, particularly in that time, were inventing themselves, creating these small businesses, and it was really exciting. And then the past few years, things kind of slowed down a bit, and you had I suddenly have to compete with DoorDash and Blue Apron and all these heavily funded startups. That's been kind of rough. But then when COVID hit, people suddenly got really interested in supporting their community again, and health and the environment. And obviously, we bring things to people's doorsteps because we're a home delivery service. So, of course, that gave people a lot of comfort. And so things got really busy this year.
So then what you're saying is your business actually got better as soon as the pandemic started.
Yeah, I sort of...
How did you capitalize on that?
Well, already we had a lot of old customers, because I've been doing this for 10 years,
Okay.
that came back. And then a really wonderful food writer for the New York Times named Tejal Rao wrote a piece. And then suddenly, oh my God, I was really busy at the warehouse packing these boxes. And every time I looked, there was another 50 people signed up. And I was like, oh my God. And then we were just like, no, we have to shut it down. So when
you say shut it down, you mean you couldn't take any
we
more
couldn't
orders?
take any more new customers. We had to just...
Did you have a waiting list?
We had 500 people on the waiting list.
Did you ever...
little by little, we were able... But because also, oh my God, in the beginning, people were hoarding and panicked.
You mean they're actually hoarding your food too?
Also. But if you went into the supermarkets, there was nothing on the shelves, right?
Right. That I remember reading
And the
about
supply
that.
chain was really disrupted.
Was
eggs.
it disrupted for you?
Yeah, in some things.
Even if you were working with these...
Well, for example, I used to get my eggs for years. I got eggs from a lovely farm called Dare to Dream up in Lompoc. And they do chicken coops for people and set them up with chicken coops and bring them little chicks and all that. But they also had eggs. And so I'd worked with them for years, and then suddenly they're like, you know what? We're pivoting a bit. And everybody was pivoting because our community, we need to focus on them. So they developed their CSA and it probably exploded.
CSA, what is that?
The community supported agriculture. So it's like a grower who puts together a box of vegetables. And originally, the whole concept of the CSA was that you would share the risk with the grower, and you would buy into the season. And in exchange, you'd be getting a box a week of vegetables. And if it was a good year, you'd get a great box. If it was a so-so year, it wouldn't be so good. But now the concept is a bit broader now. But basically, the CSA is usually the grower who puts together a weekly box of vegetables. So they started doing that, and they just didn't have enough for their community to be able to sell me the eggs anymore, which meant I suddenly had to solve the egg problem. One of the people that I worked with actually was part of, you can't sell at the market unless you're a certified grower. But people would have an avocado tree, and they'd want to sell their avocados. And they figured out how you could just get your tree certified.
Oh.
Yeah.
So there was a workaround.
And then another thing, and there's a baker I work with, and he was baking with his oven in his backyard. In Silver Lake.
Oh.
Amazing master baker. And he was part of this kind of happened a few years ago when this whole, thing exploded after 2008. The Cottage Food Act, Cottage Food Law, where people could get basically certified to be able to sell things that they made in their home kitchen or whatever, certain things.
It was against the law before that.
Yeah, and so it was a big barrier because you'd have to go into a commercial kitchen to be able to produce that stuff, and
right.
Yeah.
And
there's a side of it that's kind of subversive in a way, figuring out because most of the rules and laws have been written for these big, huge industrial entities, and so taking that back.
They gave the money to the lobbyists to help them.
All of that, and I mean, like the Farm Bill, like that's part of what subsidizes the growing of all of this corn with using the GMO corn, and then they have to make that into high glucose corn syrup because they're growing so much of it because it's subsidized, and then that goes into all of this crappy food that gives people,
cholesterol, diabetes,
all that shit,
heart disease, you name it. Yeah.
So it's this whole cycle that's not healthy for the planet or the individual. So I always like to say, like, every decision I make, I'm trying to think about, we're a certified B Corp, which means we're certified for our social and environmental impact. And, if you don't have healthy soil, a healthy community, you're not going to have your individual health or your family's health either. It's all connected. Yeah, I think my box may have just arrived.
You heard it?
I think I heard the doorbell.
Do you want me to...
Various things, it arrived, and I was like, I want to get my box.
Well, tell us a little bit what you just received today.
Our first box after our break. Every year we take a break at Christmas and New Year's, so my fridge is empty for the first time in a long time, and it was basically a sort of healthy, not too hard to cook kind of meals. One of the things I was really happy about is that we've got this fresh spinach pasta made by my friend Michael Mission Rose. He makes it, and he brought it down for us from Santa Barbara. He gets the spinach at the market, and he has a brass extruder pasta machine. So I'm excited about this. I used to go every week up to Santa Barbara and buy the stuff there and bring it down. But as we grew, I couldn't really be hauling stuff around anymore, and I had to wait for people to come to me. So I don't see some of my Santa Barbara makers and growers as much anymore. So that was happy. And this is an add-on, but I had to have it. So this is
pizza dough.
It's pizza dough, lupacata. So my friend Inez, she makes the dough, and each one, like, we have these sort of pizza parties in our family. So each person has a chopping board, and they get their dough. You stretch the dough, and then we have some sort of tomato sauce, and then you can put like whatever you want on it. This one, I was talking about the Tehachapi flour.
Yeah.
So this is a morning bun from Baker's Needed, which is a really cool baker here in LA, and they use the Tehachapi flour.
Okay. So they used it
to make the...
They use a flour that came from a heritage grain that was milled to make this flour.
Yeah, and then it goes to the baker, and then... So I get deliveries from Sherry, who's sort of organizes a lot of this grain coming and going, and she'll take it to the tortilla maker and gets it. There's two different people, because one of the tortilla makers makes the flour tortillas and the other one makes the corn tortillas. And then she also has like flour and polenta, and she'll drop it off to me once a week, and that's really cool.
What's in that orange glass?
This one?
Is that moonshine?
Basically, I think there are people who order just because of our orange juice. I mean,
just orange juice?
It's orange juice. So we buy local organic oranges from a grower, Sycamore, and they bring it once a week. And I have this machine, and you put the oranges in the hopper, and it has these wheels. It squeezes it.
Oh yeah, I've seen them all over Italy. Actually.
Yeah. So I invested in that machine quite a while ago, and it's done a good job over the years.
Oh, good.
And like, it makes orange juice, grapefruit juice. We make lemonade as well, and at certain times of the year we make pomegranate juice as well. And then what else do I have here? purple broccoli.
How has the pandemic affected you? If anything, I think you've done more business.
Yeah,
this
I
year.
mean, we tripled our sales for
Can you say that
2020.
one more time? You what?
Tripled
You tripled your
our
volume,
sales.
Your sales.
Well, like we made 3 times as many sales. Not as many, but our yearly sales, the number tripled since from between 2019 and 2020.
Oh, that's great. Can you maybe walk us through why that is?
Well, because so many people came on board, partly because they needed food delivered, partly because I think it became more vital to people to feel that they were supporting their local community, which is really what we do. And then, of course, that New York Times article kind of
didn't hurt.
Didn't hurt. It's a bittersweet thing because I've been paddling so hard for 10 years doing this, and I haven't really changed anything, and it's taken a sort of horrific tragedy for my business to suddenly be doing really well. And what I'm hoping is that we can maintain some of the momentum that we've gained, and it enables me to hire people and create jobs. There's always been resistance. People want to choose their own produce, and then a lot of our customers are the types of people that do like to go to the farmer's market, and I'll be happy if they go back because that's such a but at the same time, when you go to the farmer's market, most often you're buying a few things. You don't want to be carrying, you helped me carry my 3 boxes down the steps. You need to be seriously equipped to get that volume of food at the farmer's market and plan it and know what you're doing. So I think it can also be complementary to that. But there's another piece to this. So, like you, I lived abroad for a very long time, and it's not just the food sourcing that was troubling for me when I came back, but it was also one thing that I loved was the food culture, and that people loved to cook, and they loved to get together and cook for each other and sit around the table for hours and drink a bottle of wine and talk and tell stories. And it was part of a very human connection thing. And when we first moved here, we would invite people over and try to recreate that. And after a while, I was sort of like, yeah, it's interesting because nobody ever invites us back. And then somebody did, and it was like all this stuff they'd got from Whole Foods and put out on the table, like...
So there's no cooking involved.
No. And so there has been a detachment from the cooking culture as convenience and outsourcing. And also there's a weird, the female liberation is tied in with that in a kind of weird way, because some people will be very proud to say, well, all I can do is fry an egg or whatever. But that's not actually very liberating for anybody, regardless of gender. But what happened with COVID is that everybody started to cook. They just all started to cook.
How many bread makers I saw on TikTok?
Yeast was impossible to find. There was no yeast.
Everybody started baking.
Everybody was baking and just cooking their way through the pandemic. I think by now there's a little bit of cooking fatigue set in.
I don't know about that.
But that was fantastic to be able to, speak to that for people. Like, here are these beautiful things to cook with. We can support your community. It's good for you. And not only that, but there's this slowdown that's happened. And instead of feeling too stressed and too busy to cook, people realize, you know what? I have the bandwidth for this now. And it was a really special time for people to spend with their family and cook with their family and enjoy something nourishing and special. So
it always comes down to, what are you going to do with it?
Totally. We serve a lot of families, and sometimes they'd be like, particularly here in LA with this whole like, oh my God, if my kid doesn't do X, Y, Z, they're not going to Harvard. I'm like, look, lady, your kid's not going to Harvard anyway. So why don't you enjoy your time with them and ratchet down the pressure to have all of these achievements, and realize that the time you spend connecting with your child around the table is the best investment that you can make. And not only that, you're modeling a healthy lifestyle to them. You're, communicating with them, like this idea of like taking your food and watching it, to your room and in front of the TV or whatever. That's, when is your family check-in? Yeah. It's around the table. Mm-hmm. And when you're even able to involve them maybe in helping peel the carrots or shell the peas and just talk about the day and connect and really realize, oh, they're unhappy about something that might have just been totally under the radar, you know. So I feel like that investment into, you know, that healthy behavior modeling and that communication is probably long-term going to be way more important than that one hockey practice or whatever it is that the kid's just going to because they have to do all this stuff, you know. And then time can slow down and we can just, you know, enjoy being with the people we love.
Where do you see what you're doing, your business, in about another 3 to 5 years? Where do you want to be? And once again, can you just tell people the name of your company?
Oh, it's called Narrative Food. So it's, the idea with narrative is that it's food that tells a story. And we deliver across most of Southern California. Most of our density is in Los Angeles. So yeah, we would like to get more density. You know, for me, there's a sweet spot. I don't need to take over the world. I don't need this to be some huge company, blah, blah, blah. What I'd like is just for the company itself to be sustainable within as well as what we're doing, so that we have a happy team that's paid well, that enjoys what they're doing, that shares an experience with people, and maybe we can, you know, tell stories of all sorts of diverse food stories, because that's culture, and particularly in a moment of sort of cancel culture or whatever, like I think identity is really tied up with food, and keeping that alive a little bit, as well as supporting all these cool makers that are having all these great ideas, and then, you know, seeing what we can do with it. We're a pretty creative company, and I think there's a lot we can do, just given a certain, the right size. So I'm hoping that that's where we'll be in 3 to 5 years.
Jennifer, can you walk us through some of your marketing techniques and what social media you use?
Most of our social is on Instagram at Narrative Food.
Okay.
Our website's narrativefood.com. I love that you're doing this TikTok videos. That's part of the reason I started talking to you, is because I want to start doing, I'd had this idea before, particularly when everybody was on lockdown. It's like, well, what if I could build these videos that are kind of user generated, so that like Alex or Nate, who's growing the wheat, could like show the field and show themselves, and then Sherry could show herself driving to the miller, and then we could just stitch this together and really show the story. I really love it because it's people.
I believe that the future is very much in accordance to what Andy Warhol said many years ago. He said, in the future, everyone's going to be famous for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And I think we're beginning to see.
Well, yeah, sometimes for the wrong reasons, sadly. Like when you see what happened last week, but Jesus.
Yeah. Anyway, listen, Jennifer, I wanted to thank you so very much.
No, thank you for talking to me. It's been fun.
Been a great, great pleasure to talk to you.
And goodbye, everybody.
Ciao.
Thank you. Ciao.
Okay.
Ciao, ciao.
Fantastico.